You stand in the shadow of a palace older than Rome, on an island older than Greece. The air is salt, thick, heavy with stone dust and animal musk. Somewhere deep in the rock below your feet, a corridor turns, and another, a passage that never reaches sun. And in that passage something paces. You have heard the story 1,000 times. A monster, half bull, half man, locked away by a king, ashamed of his wife's sin. But what if the monster was never the thing in the labyrinth? What if the Minotaur was a lie told to control an empire? What if the terror the Greeks felt when they spoke that name had nothing to do with horns and everything to do with power? Stay with me. This is where the thread unravels. The story you know is neat, almost too neat. King Minos of Crete, favored by the gods, prays for a sign from Poseidon. The god sends a snow-white bull, meant for sacrifice. But Minos, greedy for beauty, keeps the bull alive and offers a common animal instead. Poseidon, insulted, does something strange. He makes Minos' wife, Pasiphae, fall in love with the bull. She conceives a child, the Minotaur, a creature of shame, hidden in a labyrinth built by Daedalus. Every year, Athens sends 14 young people into the maze as tribute. The monster eats them, until Theseus arrives, kills the beast, and follows a thread back to the light. It's a perfect myth. A villain, a monster, a hero, a happy ending. But perfect stories are usually lies. The cracks begin, as they always do, with dates. Archaeological evidence places the height of Minoan civilization at roughly 2000 to 1400 before the Common Era. Knossos, the palace beneath the labyrinth, was a city of perhaps 100,000 people. It had running water, multi-story buildings, art that still feels modern, and it dominated the Aegean with a navy that no one challenged. Now consider Athens during the same period. Athens was not yet a city of marble and philosophy. It was a cluster of hilltop villages, poor, fragmented, struggling to survive. The tribute of 14 young people every year would have been a catastrophic drain on a population that small, and yet the Athenians kept sending them. Why would a proto-city commit demographic suicide for centuries unless the tribute was not about feeding a monster, but about feeding a political machine? The tribute was not about feeding a monster, it was about feeding a political machine. That subtle shift in understanding is the kind of thread this channel follows into every labyrinth. Subscribe to keep walking the corridors with us. And in the comments, name the modern story you now suspect is a political machine wearing a monster's mask. One word will do. Here's where the bones tell a different story. In the early 20th century, when Arthur Evans excavated Knossos, he found something strange beneath the palace. A complex of rooms, corridors, storage chambers, and dead ends that matched the myth's labyrinth in shape, but not in function. These were not prison walls. They were administrative chambers. The labyrinth, in Minoan culture, was likely the palace itself, a vast bureaucratic center that produced goods, collected taxes, managed trade, and projected power. The word labyrinth comes from Labris, the double-headed axe, a Minoan symbol of authority. The monster was not chained beneath the palace. The palace itself was the monster. But that raises a darker question. Every year, the tribute ships sailed from Athens to Crete. Every year, young men and women disappeared into the palace, never to return. But there is no mass grave at Knossos, no bones piled in chambers, no evidence of ritual cannibalism or slaughter. What happened to them? Some historians argue they became slaves, integrated into the Minoan economy as labor, artisans, soldiers. Others propose a more chilling theory: they were sold. Crete sat at the intersection of 3 continents, and human trafficking was as old as civilization. The young Athenians may have been currency, traded for copper from Cyprus, ivory from Africa, tin from the far reaches of the Mediterranean. The monster's appetite was not for flesh, it was for power. And the myth of the Minotaur was the perfect cover. The monster's appetite was for power, not flesh, and the myth was the perfect cover for an empire's darkest trade. This is the kind of truth that does not fit into the stories we were told, and it requires a community brave enough to hold it. Subscribe to stay with this community as we unearth more such truths. And in the comments, leave the word that names this mechanism. What do you call a story that hides a traffic in human lives? Cover. Propaganda. Silence. Whichever lands first. Think about what the story accomplishes. It transforms a political subjugation into a divine curse. It makes the sacrifice of Athens' youth seem inevitable, even noble, a price paid to the gods, not to a king. It paints Minos as a tragic figure, not a tyrant. But most importantly, it scares the enemy. Every Athenian child grew up hearing that Crete held a monster that devoured young people. The terror was not abstract. It was named. It had a shape. It lived in a specific place, and you could be sent there at any time. The Minotaur was propaganda, and propaganda works best when it hides inside a story. Now consider the hero who ends it all. Theseus arrives, kills the Minotaur, and follows Ariadne's thread back to freedom. He is a prince, but he is also something else, a political symbol. In one version of the myth, he sails to Crete with black sails of mourning, promising his father he will change them to white if he survives. He forgets. His father, Aegeus, sees the black sails and throws himself into the sea. Theseus becomes king. Read that carefully. The monster dies, but the hero's own father dies too, by his son's negligence. The myth does not end triumphantly. It ends with a king's suicide and a prince's broken promise. Why would a victory story include such a bitter flaw? Because the storytellers knew. The Athenians who shaped this myth in the centuries after Crete's fall were not writing fairy tales. They were rewriting history. By the time of classical Athens, roughly 500 to 400 before the Common Era, the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur had become a foundational story. The moment Athens threw off tyranny and declared itself free. It was told in plays, painted on vases, carved into temples. But the real political transformation had nothing to do with a monster. What actually happened? Crete collapsed. Around 1400 before the Common Era, the Minoan civilization fragmented, possibly due to a volcanic eruption on Thera, possibly due to invasion by mainland Mycenaeans, possibly both. The palace economy ended. The tribute stopped. Athens did not defeat a monster. It simply outlived its conqueror. The myth was woven later to give the victory meaning. This is where the myth becomes something darker. If the Minotaur was propaganda for Crete, it was also propaganda for Athens. The story allowed Athens to claim an ancient, heroic freedom, a liberation won by a prince with a sword, when the reality was far more mundane. The Athenians had been subjects, not victims. They had paid tribute, not blood. But a story of economic collapse and geopolitical luck does not inspire a democracy. A story of a hero killing a monster does. And so the lie was preserved, polished, and passed down through millennia until it became indistinguishable from history. But here is the truth that the myth hides, and the truth that modern historians rarely speak aloud. Every empire that fears rebellion builds a monster, not a real one, a story, a threat that justifies control, a hidden enemy that only the ruler can defeat. Crete had the Minotaur, Athens later had the Persian, Rome had the barbarian. Every age invents its labyrinth and fills it with something that justifies sacrifice. The monster is never the real threat. The real threat is the story itself and the power it gives the storyteller. The question you must now sit with is not whether you believed in the Minotaur. The question is, what monster is being built in the labyrinth you live inside right now? What story are you told every day that scares you into compliance? That question is the thread that leads out of every labyrinth ever built. Subscribe to hold on to that thread as we dismantle the next myth together. And in the comments, write the monster, the story that scares you into compliance. In one word. The truth is in the naming. The horns were never sharp. The thread was always in your hand. The door was never locked. But the story of the story made you believe you could not leave. If this opened something in you, the recognition that myths are not ancient and dead, but alive and political, then you understand why channels like this exist. The next myth we dismantle is one you have been told your entire life, and it has shaped the way you think about freedom, fear, and power. The name of that myth is one you will recognize the moment you hear it. Save this video. When you watch the next one, come back here first. The thread is only useful if you hold both ends. The myth of the Minotaur survives not because it is true, but because it is useful. It teaches a lesson so deep that it bypasses the thinking mind entirely. That there is a monster, that the monster requires sacrifice, and that only a hero can end it. But the truth is the opposite. The monster was never real. The sacrifice was political. And the hero was a story written after the fact. The labyrinth was not a prison, it was a palace, and the people who walked its corridors were not victims of a beast. They were subjects of an empire that had learned to govern through fear. That is the real inheritance of the myth, not the horns, not the thread, the mechanism. And the mechanism works the same today. Think about the last time a story made you afraid of something you could not see, an enemy you could not name, a threat that required sacrifice. The story felt true because it was ancient, or because it came from authority, or because everyone believed it. But every myth that controls you begins the same way. It names a monster, it builds a labyrinth, and it makes you believe that the thread is held by someone else. The Minotaur myth is not a dusty relic. It is a blueprint, and it has been used over and over for 4,000 years. The palace at Knossos crumbled, the stones were carried away. The labyrinth became rubble. But the idea of the labyrinth did not die. It was transplanted, renamed, and rebuilt inside every society that wanted its people to be afraid. A few years ago, archaeologists found a Minoan sealstone carved with a figure in a bull leaping pose, a young person vaulting over the horns of a charging bull. The scene was once called religious, even playful, but look closer. The bull in the carving has no chains. The leper has no armor. It is not a sacrifice. It is a negotiation, a person facing the beast and moving through it, not killing it. The Minoans who carved that image understood something we have forgotten. The monster does not die by the sword. It dies by refusal. You are the one who holds the thread. You always were. The labyrinth was never real. It was a story told by kings who needed you to believe you were lost. And once you see that, the myth collapses. Not into dust, but into light. The horns vanish. The walls dissolve. And what remains is not a monster, but a mirror. Look into it. Ask the question the myth never wanted you to ask. What am I afraid of because I was taught to be afraid? The answer is the only thread that matters, and you have had it in your hand from the beginning.